Hi all, welcome back to the Sprucegate Modeling. Today we will be painting the Panzer IV-J from Rubicon. I've kept everything in sub-assemblies for painting, and the first thing we're going to be doing is giving it a nice shot of black primer. This will, basically, make sure that all the metal bits are ready to paint before we put on the base layer of Dunkelgelb. This is a color that I mix myself from Vallejo Paints. I find that I actually really like to mix my own Dunkelgelb because it lets me vary it from tank to tank. This one is a mixture between camouflage, orange ochre, and dark green. Next up, I'm going to be giving a pretty decently heavy coat of straight white to the tank. This will kind of be a panel fade in some ways, in other ways it won't be, as I'm sure you can see with the application here. This will be the basis for our whitewash. We want this, again, pretty heavy, but I do want to be able to see some of the stuff, so I'm applying it pretty carefully. Here you can see it finished. As you can see, there's some bits of Dunkelgelb still poking out, but now I'm going to be taking some AK weathering pencils. This is streaking dirt. I'm going to be adding some initial streaking. You're also going to have to add a varnish layer in between. Next, I'm going to take a damp brush, and I am going to basically smooth out the streaks, feather the edges, and make them a little bit more subtle. These can be pretty heavy, though, because this is very initial streaking. We're going to be going back over the whitewash later. This is to get a really base weathering. It's better to do it really very much in the stages of painting when you're doing whitewash. Next, I will be chipping with a paintbrush and some very dark brown paint. This will be going on some of the sharper edges and areas that I feel like would be worn. Again, initial, this will be gone back over. This is a baseline for later weathering. I'm also going to be taking some medium rust weathering pencils, and I'm going to be going over some of the chips and trying to streak some rust down. This, again, pretty heavy because we want it to be visible later. We're then going to do the same thing with a wet brush, just streaking it to make sure that it is pretty subtle and not super heavy. But I do want it to be visible after I go back over it. Next, I'm going to be taking light rust and really get some of the buildup here. Again, very important on this whitewash that I'm doing to make sure that I get the weathering built up in stages. I'm going to be adding a couple chips with it, various little things. And I'll be going back over it with the paintbrush in the same manner. Here you can see the first layer of whitewash weathered, and we're going to be going in with the second. I have taken a micro applicator and I have dipped it in white oil paint, and I'm going to be kind of doing an oil dot method on this tank, except that it won't quite be for weathering, it's going to be for the whitewash. So I'm going to be adding dots of it on especially some of the upper surfaces. On some of the smaller vertical surfaces, it's better to not do it in the lower half because it just gets really messy. And these are going to be pretty close together, as you can see here. Try not to apply them too tight on the confined areas, like here on the turret bustle. I think I applied it a little bit too heavy there, but I fixed it later. But you're going to be wanting quite a few of these dots because the way I see it, you can actually just remove a lot of this with thinner, worst comes to worst, and getting it done in one go is really helpful to achieving a uniform look on your tank. And again, you can see these are really messy dots. It doesn't need to be anything fancy because we're going to be doing it the oil dot method with these. Next, I'm going to be taking a wet brush, wet with thinner oil paint thinner. I'm going to be streaking those oil dots. This will actually give a really nice whitewash. I've seen it done really well with this layered weathering, actually on 1/100th vehicles. So I'm going to be trying to replicate this on this 1/56th tank. I am doing a streaking thing here, not quite a blending thing. As you can see, it's actually looking pretty linear. I'm actually like how it looks. I'm not totally sure how accurate it would be for a whitewash tank. Here you can see it just about complete. I'm yet to do the gun barrel on this one. And there you are. It's all done. You can see that just a bit of the weathering left from the first layer. Next, I'm going to be taking a black wash, and I'm going to be doing a pin wash on all recessed details, panel lines, rivets, just about any detail you can imagine. This is, as you can see, pretty heavy. I'm going to have to remove a lot of this after the fact because it is much heavier than I need it to be. But it is really nice to get those panel lines really sharp, especially on these white vehicles where contrast is really everything. Here you can see I am doing the front fenders, and here you can see that I am removing a bunch of the excess wash because, like I said, it spilled out around the edges more than I wanted it to. You're going to go over this pretty heavy over the entire tank, all details, because it is really important to get it nice and panel line, lots of contrast, break it up a bit. Next, I'm going to be taking a sponge dipped in dark brown, and I'm going to be doing some pretty light overall chipping. My preliminary chipping here is with a bit of white, like really light paint, just for pre-chips and some highlights before I go in with the brown. So here you can see I am doing the brown. I'm also going to go around some of the panel lines here. Very light on the sponge. Not a lot of paint left on the sponge so that you don't end up ruining your whitewash. And then I'm going to be going back in with those AK weathering pencils. This is, I believe, smoke. I am going to be doing even more streaking with this. I'm kind of going all out on the streaking. I think that this would be really good practice for streaking for myself personally. And it'll look really cool on the whitewash when it's done. I'm going to be going in with that wet brush again, and you got to make sure that these really are not too strong because this is the final layer. I'm also going to be taking a light rust wash, and I'm going to be applying it on some of the details. This will appear very bright against the white, so you have to be careful when you're going in and cleaning this up. This is an acrylic wash from Vallejo, so I do need to do this pretty quickly before I go back in and clean it all up with water. I probably should put a little bit of drying retarder in it. Next up, I'm going to be doing some initial weathering on the road wheels. These have been painted like the rest of the tank so far. This is just a dark brown oil wash that I made. I'm going to be applying it over it just to give it, pretty muddy, earthy look, as opposed to a much, I guess one would say drier, but rustier rest of the tank. These should look pretty, like, legitimately dirty, not necessarily streaked and rusty. I'm going to be applying this pretty heavily to each road wheel here. Make sure it gets in all the nice little crevasses and lines. And this will be very much my first mud and environmental weathering step. Here you can see that it really tones down the lines a lot. Next, we're going to be starting up with the detail. This is going to be black over all bare metal, machine guns, tools. I did the fire extinguisher. Technically, that's painted with a gray, but I honestly didn't really want to do that, and I thought that it would look really cool if I made it much more uniform. It would make it look much more, give it a lot more contrast against the tank. I'm going to go in with some dark brown for the wood, which I'm then going to highlight with some lighter wood brown. The highlights on this I actually really liked because the wood was really dark compared to the whitewash, and then the highlights really brought it up and gave it a very nice look. Next up, I'll be painting the tracks. These were just done with a chocolate brown, which I really carefully painted over the tracks. I should have left these a little bit less assembled before I painted them, but it was actually just easier to do it this way, even if the painting took a little bit longer. The tracks aren't super detailed, so I'm not super worried about the thickness of the paint there. Next up, I'm going to be taking gunmetal. I'm just going to be giving a really light highlight to all of those bare metal pieces that I painted earlier. Again, this is really important because the contrast on the white tank stands out a ton. And next up, this is going to be one of my more final weathering steps. I'm going to be taking a kind of sludge oil wash that I made with black and dark brown. Somewhere right in the middle of those two, and I'm going to be applying it pretty heavily over some of the corners, edges, definitely in those fender areas. And I'm going to be doing a bunch of streaking with it. This gives a very grimy winter look to it, and will kind of do the same thing for the tank that it did for the wheels, even though it's not as uniform. I'm then obviously going to need to go back in with some enamel thinner to streak it and make sure that it is not as incredibly heavy as it is right now. That's the good thing about oil washes. It takes a little while for them to dry compared to that rust wash that I used earlier. You can see here that I'm feathering the edges with the thinner. I'm kind of really trying to make those edges super dark and have it fade in. You can see I've also done a bit on the engine deck here. And here you can see that we're just kind of moving on to the final weathering steps. I'm taking a black and I'm just dry brushing the muzzle brake as well as some of the exhaust areas, because it, to simulate soot buildup from firing the gun and from driving the tank. This is something really simple I've just been doing since I started modeling, and no matter what build it is, doing this with pigments or just with black dry brush really helps with the character of the tank. And on the whitewash vehicle, the upside is that it really does add to that contrast that I've been talking about this entire thing with the streaking and everything. Unfortunately here, it does look a little bit weird because I did not fully let the enamel thinner dry. I don't know what I was thinking there, so it does look a little bit weird. It'll look better after that dries, and I might have to go back and redo some of those areas. The thing about the whitewash here is that you can't go too heavy because it will look really, really weird. Here you can see I'm trying to clean it up with my fingers. And the final step is assembling all of those little sub pieces. This has the wire mesh skirts in, which I've just kind of cut up a little bit. In some of the areas, added a couple of holes that I found in reference pictures that are surrounded by a bit of soot. That's just done with the black dry brush that we did last step. I'm going to apply them pretty carefully. They are rather fragile, unfortunately, and I kind of put something on backwards the first time and had to reconstruct them. But here you can see that I finished assembling, and these are some of the finished shots of the tank. I'm actually pretty happy with how this turned out, with all of the rust tones and the streaking over the whitewash. I think that it does a really good job making the tank look beat up, dirty, and I don't know, the first thing that really comes to mind is tired. So yeah, thanks for watching. I really enjoyed this build, and I hope you enjoyed the video.